for a closing keynote, I'd like to ask Jim Pepper Henry to provide us some good words and a path forward. Jim is a member of CAW and Muscogee and has vast museum experience. A lot of respect, much like Rick, I have a lot of respect for Jim. Both of them were very, very close to my father, and he considered them good friends, so they're good people to me. Jim was Associate Director at NMAI. He was Director at the Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen Center, Director at the Heard Museum, Director at the Gilchrist Museum, and is now the Director of First Americans Museum. Please welcome Jim Pepper Henry.
All right, good afternoon. I want to talk a little bit about First Americans Museum, and I appreciate Joe inviting me to come speak at this symposium, and thanks to Ben for making all the arrangements, and of course, the Autry Museum. And talk a little bit about one of the newest museums in the United States, and probably the newest museum based on American Indian culture. First Americans Museum opened in September of last year, right in the middle of COVID, and it was very complicated to open the museum during that time. Just like Stephen, it affected our construction schedule. We were going to open in May originally of 2021, and we ended up opening in September. But we plowed through and made it to the opening. Most of my staff was working from home during that time, but I stayed on site with the construction crew. Construction crew never quit, and so I hope you can come to Oklahoma City and see our facility. I'm going to talk a little bit about the design of the facility and how we're pushing the envelope here. And the First Americans Museum is located at the crossroads of America, the intersection of I-35 and I-40. 120,000 cars drive right by our facility every single day. So we're in a great location, and we have a most beautiful view of downtown Oklahoma City. I arrived in 2017 and was director of Gilchrist Museum, and this project had languished for about 6 years. It started, ground was broken in about 2006, and several things happened with this state legislature, and funding became very tight. And in 2012, construction stopped on this project. It was just a shell of a building, 175,000 square foot shell of a building. And it sat there until 2017. And there was a gentleman named Bill Anatoby, governor of the Chickasaw Nation, who contacted me while I was at Gilchrist Museum and asked if I would leave Gilchrist and come and help jumpstart this project to get it open. And I said no. And I found out pretty quickly you don't say no to Governor Anatoby of the Chickasaw Nation. So a few months later, I ended up being the director of the what is now First Americans Museum. But this is probably the most important project I've worked on in my lifetime. Of course, the National Museum of the American Indian was a major project and very close to my heart, working with Rick and getting that open. But this, in terms of meaning personally, this was a museum that was representing my tribe, one of the 39 tribes in Oklahoma, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. But early on, when I arrived, the name of this project was the American Indian Cultural Center and Museum. And that doesn't roll off the tongue very well if you try to say that quickly. And so we thought about this for a minute and said, well, certainly we can come up with a better name as we get to the finish line on construction. And we thought about this a little bit. And of course, Native peoples are not from India. And our grandparents' generation, or at least my grandparents' generation, would say we're Indian, and we've been saying that for several hundred years now, but we're not from India, and we thought, this is an opportunity for us to change that narrative. And so American Indian, that's what my parents would say, call us American Indians, and still that's not accurate. My generation, Generation X, we would say Native American, and that's much more accurate, except if you've ever filled out an application anywhere and they ask you your ethnicity, they have a box that'll say white, Hispanic, Asian, and then there's a box that says Native American. Well, 20% of people that fill out an application are automatically going to check Native American, thinking that, oh, I was born in the United States, therefore I'm Native. And so that's not quite accurate either. So we look to our neighbors to the north in Canada, and we really like the term First Nations. And about 30 to 40 years ago, the Indigenous communities in Canada made that move to kind of rebrand themselves as First Nations. And that's a powerful statement. It reminds people that there were civilizations and nations in this continent, in this hemisphere, long before Europeans. And so we came up with the idea, why not First Americans? Other organizations have been starting to use that term, First Americans. And First Americans Museum has a much better acronym than AICCM. It's easy to say FAM. So from a marketing perspective, it was much better. But it really is sending a statement, especially in Oklahoma, where it's the reddest state in the country. Every county in Oklahoma voted Republican in the last election. And so it's a tough state to make a statement like this in, but we did get a little bit of resistance in the beginning. One of our state legislators, I had a little argument with that person, and they said, well, you're not the first Americans. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington are the first Americans. And I said, well, they're the first U.S. citizens. And when we say American, we're talking about geography, not about citizenship. In fact, First Americans or Native Americans are the last people to have our citizenship. We're the last U.S. citizens. We didn't get our citizenship until 1924. In fact, we didn't have the right to vote collectively as Native Americans until 1965. So I reminded him that, and I saw this meme one time, and I explained that we're talking about geography, that even though this hemisphere is named after an Italian, Amerigo Vespucci, we don't have a collective term among indigenous peoples. We have our own names for what this land is, but we've adopted the term America, and so therefore we are the first peoples of this hemisphere. We are the first Americans. And so not only did we rebrand our museum, we're taking that next step and trying to rebrand an entire race of people, and it's been catching on here and there, and I hope the next generation will adopt that term First Americans, because we are not from India, and I wonder if Columbus was trying to find China, what we'd be called then. This is what we call the Hall of the People, this glass structure. It's very striking as you drive along Interstate 40. And people ask me what's the inspiration for this? Is that a giant headdress, or is it a giant contact lens? What is that? And we consulted all 39 tribes in Oklahoma on the design of this building. And of course, as Heather mentioned, our tribes come from all over the contiguous United States. We have 12 different language groups. We have different cultural lifeways. We're not all the same. And we wanted to be careful that we weren't picking iconography that was too specific to one tribe or another, that we would try to find common elements to help create the design of the museum. And so everybody collectively felt that it was very important to honor the original indigenous peoples of what is now Oklahoma, and those were the Caddo and the Wichita peoples, and they were there long before the other tribes arrived during the removal period. And so the inspiration for that glass structure is a Wichita grass lodge, and all the tribes felt it was important to honor them, and so we have this modern version of a Wichita grass lodge. Our entire site is really a giant cosmological clock. And it was important to our Native constituents when we consulted with them that we think of time from an indigenous perspective rather than from a Western European perspective. It was kind of funny when Joe was looking at his watch earlier today. It made me think about this particular story about how we can tell time or the heart rate of our people, maybe from this design as well too. But so we thought about this a little bit, and you can see the design is really two circles are two semicircles. This larger circle is a giant earthen mound. There's 500,000 cubic yards of earth that went into the design of that. And we're making a statement because one of the great civilizations in North America is in Oklahoma, Spiro Mounds. Spiro Mounds was larger in population than London at the time of the arrival of Europeans. And people think that human habitation of Oklahoma started during the land run in the 1880s. And we wanted to remind people that there's been continuous occupation of what is now Oklahoma for thousands and thousands of years. And this is a way to honor our ancestors by this giant earthen mound. And that mound culture kind of starts in that part of the country and moves up through the Midwest and into the eastern part of the United States. And then you can see the modern circle there, or the smaller circle is our modern age. And where those two meet is that beautiful glass structure, the Hall of the People. And you can actually walk up to the top of that mound and you have the most beautiful view of downtown Oklahoma City. So I'll explain a little bit about the cosmological clock. Here's the mound. This is a giant plaza that we have. It's 3 football fields wide, and we've had all kinds of activity in that field since we've opened. Stickball games. We've had our opening ceremonies were in that field. You see this tunnel that goes through that mound, and that tunnel is large enough to drive a fire truck or a semi-truck through. It's pretty large. It doesn't look large there in the picture, but that is our winter solstice tunnel. So on the shortest day of the year, on December 21st, the sun will set perfectly within that tunnel, and it's very amazing. And as time goes on, as the days get longer, the sun will start setting up the mound, on the ridge of the mound, until it gets to the apex of the mound, which is June 21st, the longest day of the year, and it looks like this when the sun sets there. So we can tell time just, obviously if it's on a sunny day, we kind of know what time of the year it is. Now on the equinoxes, you see this beautiful stainless steel arch with a hand in the middle. Now the sun rises obviously in the east, and on the equinoxes, that beautiful arch silhouettes the sun with the hand in it. And I don't have a picture of it, but it's very beautiful on the autumnal and vernal equinoxes. And that's the entrance to our building. You can see our entrance is flanked by these 2 stone walls, which is Musquebec stone. That is a stone that's quarried in Oklahoma. Musquebec is a Potawatomi word. It means amber glow or amber light. So in the morning time, it catches that beautiful morning sun. And we call this the remembrance walls. And when our tribes, our 39 tribal nations, were removed from our homelands, over 100,000 people perished on the journey to Oklahoma. I think in the Muscogee Creek Nation alone, close to 20,000 people died being marched 10 miles a day from their homelands to Oklahoma. And I haven't counted them, but the architects tell me there are 100,000 stones in that wall. And we actually have left gaps open, just kind of like the Wailing Wall in Israel, that people could leave messages in there for the loved ones that didn't make that journey to Oklahoma. Now that hand that you see there, this is a sculpture designed by a Cherokee artist duo, Bill and Demos Glass. And there's a lot of meaning that goes into that, but I'm going to give you kind of the abbreviated version. But that open hand, and think about, and Heather showed a slide, I think I have it in here too, of all the nations in Europe being moved to a place the size of England. And well, that's what happened in Oklahoma, not in terms of population, but in terms of cultural lifeways and languages. And so we arrived here in Oklahoma, and we didn't all speak the same language. We had to have a way to communicate. And there's some truth to some stereotypes. If you've ever played Cowboys and Indians as a kid, people would say, how? Well, that open hand actually means welcome. You are welcome in this area. A closed hand would mean it's time to move along. You're not welcome here. And you see there's a cross inside that palm of that hand. Those are the 4 directions. So we're telling our visitors, no matter where you are from, you are welcome at First Americans Museum. So that's our entryway. And again, those are elements that were common among the tribes and that we incorporated into the design of the building. You can see some of the incredible architecture, almost like wings of an eagle that flank the entrance of the museum. And this is a view of the museum at nighttime. We can light the Hall of the People up, that glass dome, with just about any color we want to. There's actually, they call it the JPH disco mode, where we can turn that into disco lights too, but that's only on special occasions. Heather had shown a very similar image earlier. Our tribes come from all over the contiguous United States. My tribe, the Kaw people or the Kanza people, come from what is now called Kansas. So all of our tribes had our version of the Trail of Tears moving to Oklahoma. Here's that map again. That's the equivalent of moving most of the tribes in Europe to a place the size of England. And Heather mentioned that our beautiful Origins Theater, and it was important for us to set, and I use a lot of language I learned from the best from Rick West over the years, and one of my favorite sayings that he has is tone and tenor. We set the tone and tenor of the experience of the museum through this Origins Theater. And Heather mentioned the copper wall. I'm going to skip past this a little bit because she talked about this. But one thing I do want to mention, in all of the production of all of our media, it was all done. We tried to use native media companies when we could. All of our origin stories are narrated by members of those particular tribes and illustrated by artists from those tribes. And it's very beautiful and incredible, and I hope you will get to see it someday. Heather talked about the timeline in the exhibitions. But we're not shying away from telling the dark history of the tribes in Oklahoma. So we were removed from our homelands around the contiguous United States. And for 4 generations, our children were sent to government and religious boarding schools, forced to give up our languages, forced to give up our cultural lifeways. My grandparents went to boarding school, and my grandfather would tell me stories about being in boarding school and having his mouth washed out with soap for speaking the language to his relatives at boarding school. And so, and we're not shying away from talking about this. Heather mentioned that all of the stories that we tell in the museum are in the first person voice. The thing I'm most proud of on this project is that all of our curators, our entire curatorial team, were all members of tribes in Oklahoma. All of the stories that you hear are in the first person voice. We had a choice to make. We could have said them and they, which is what you get at most museums, but it's all us and we. And we could not have done this on this scale 20 to 30 years ago. In fact, I worked with Joe's dad for many years, George, and George Horse Capture back in the 80s was probably one of just a handful of Native curators in the entire United States. You could literally count the Native curators on one hand. And through Rick's efforts and the National Museum of the American Indian, training young Native people to work in the museum field, to take control of our cultural patrimony and the narrative. Today, we have a critical mass of Indigenous peoples working in the museum field, and so working with Heather, we were able to recruit an all-Native curatorial team on a scale unprecedented before in any museum like this. And Dr. Henrietta Mann told this incredible story of Sand Creek Massacre and Washita River Massacre from her own words, incredible stories of survival. And then, as Heather mentioned, we move into the contemporary world, how we're asserting our right to self-governance, we're asserting our tribal sovereignty, and we continue to be attacked by our own state and with other federal policies. And Heather mentioned the Kitch Wall. This is one of my favorite areas of the museum, how we are represented by broader society. The powwow van she mentioned. We have a lot of notable people that have come, Native peoples that have come from Oklahoma. Maria Tallchief, principal dancer at the New York City Ballet, and Scott Momaday, Pulitzer Prize winning author. John Harrington, first Native American astronaut. Of course, Wilma Mankiller, Wes Studi, who won an honorary Oscar a few years ago, and probably the greatest athlete in American history, Jim Thorpe, all members of tribes from Oklahoma. And we talked about a section on warriors. And as Heather mentioned before, 1 in 9 American Indians serve in our military, where 1 in 100 of the general population serves in our military. And that service is very important to our communities. You can't go to any tribal gathering without us honoring our veterans and the service to our country. And it's a bit ironic, as we are the most loyal defenders of this country, but probably among the worst treated peoples. And people ask me that question all the time. Why are you so loyal to the United States? Well, we're loyal to this land. We belong to this land, and we will fight for this land. It really, even if another flag was flying over this country, we would be fighting for this land because we belong to it. And I'm going to skip over a few sections. This is a great space within our facility. This is called our exchange area, where we can have live demonstrations. We have cameras up in the on a truss. You can't see it right there, but if somebody is demonstrating beadwork or quill work, we can zoom in on their hands and we can put it up on that screen and you can see the details. So we do a lot of orientations for school groups that come in there. I want to talk a little bit more detail about a section of the museum. It's called Winiko. And Winiko is a Caddo word. It means the life spirit in all things. And I was a young man in the mid 1990s and was one of the first interns at the National Museum of the American Indian when we started that program. I was working for my tribe at the time, trying to build our tribal museum, and I didn't have a lot of experience working in collections management at that point in time. And so I applied for an internship at NMAI and got placed in the collections management section. And I was really amazed about how much material was collected from the tribes in Oklahoma as I was doing my research. And of course, the basis for the National Museum of the American Indian was the collection of the old Museum of the American Indian, a collection that was amassed by one man, George Gustav High. He amassed a collection of almost 900,000 objects from tribes throughout the hemisphere. And like many people of his generation, he believed by the end of the 20th century, American Indian culture would no longer exist. We would not be making items anymore. And so he spent the better part of his life and his fortune. He was a wealthy New York banker. And he married a very wealthy woman, spent her money, and then when she was broke, divorced her, married another wealthy woman, and she outlived him, though, at the end of that. But he amassed this massive collection, and thousands of these objects were collected from tribes in Oklahoma between 1909 and 1914. And George High could not possibly go out throughout the entire hemisphere to collect these objects. So he sent surrogates out in his place. And one surrogate was a man named Mark Raymond Harrington, who came to Oklahoma and collected from just about every tribe. Ironically, he did not collect from the largest tribe in Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation, but most other tribes he did. And here is Harrington in the horse in front, and he had a native guide that helped him connect with the tribes in Oklahoma. And so as we were thinking about developing our museum, in fact, there's some irony here because when I was associate director working for Rick West at the National Museum of the American Indian, we were very interested in this project as it was getting started. And we wrote a loan agreement to loan collections from the National Museum of the American Indian to this project. And it was important for Rick and for the board that all of these thousands of objects that were in storage, some of them had never even been on exhibit during the lifetime of the old Museum of the American Indian. These were resources for the community. And we started a pretty aggressive loan program to loan collections to other tribal museums throughout the country, and including First Americans Museum. And so we had written a loan agreement, and I don't have a picture of it. Let me forward real quick. So I don't have a picture of that, but I remember that I was a surrogate for Rick to fly out to Oklahoma to sign the loan agreement. They had a big press conference. This was in 2007. And so I had my clothes packed up, and I had a connection through Atlanta, and I was flying in the night before, and the the signing ceremony for this loan agreement was the next day at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I flew into Atlanta, and there was a major thunderstorm, and all the flights were canceled to Oklahoma City. And I literally had to spend the night in the airport in Atlanta. And I caught the flight the next morning to Oklahoma City, but my bag didn't make it. And I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. And here I was going to this major press conference about this loan from the Smithsonian to this museum. And I grabbed a taxi. This was before Uber. And I grabbed a taxi, and I told the taxi driver to stop at J.C. Penney along the way so I could grab a suit. And I walked in, and I saw a mannequin with this suit on, and it looked about the same size that I was. And so I bought everything off the mannequin, the sport coat, the shirt, the shoes, everything, and made it to the press conference in time and had this wonderful press conference. And then I got back, and our accounting department was questioning. I used the government credit card to buy the suit off the mannequin, and the accounting office said, well, you're in trouble, young man. And I got sent to Rick's office, and I go, oh no, I'm in trouble now. I went in to see Rick, and I said, Rick, I'm really sorry. I didn't have any money. No, that's not what I'm concerned about. He said, he looked at the receipt and he said, you went to J.C. Penney? Couldn't you have gone to Macy's or something? Obviously Rick is probably the best dressed museum professional in the entire world. So I was not living up to his standards in that. But you did approve the reimbursement, so I do appreciate that anyway. So when I arrived at First Americans Museum, I dusted off that loan agreement and said, look, this is the loan agreement that I signed, almost 15 years ago. So that's a little bit of irony there, that I became the director of the museum that I signed a loan agreement to when I was at the Smithsonian. So Heather and her team went out to the collections facility in Suitland, Maryland to look at these objects. And the amazing thing was that when Harrington collected these objects all the way, 100 years ago, he had written the family names down on the purchase receipts. And that opened up a lot of possibilities for us. And so as we consulted all 39 tribes, we only had enough resources for each tribe to select 3 objects, even though there were thousands of objects. Each tribe selected 3 objects to be on display, and we wanted to be egalitarian about it and make sure every tribe was equally represented. And so we narrowed the list down, and the tribes selected the objects. And but the amazing thing was, because we saw the family names and we recognized a lot of these names on the purchase receipts, is that we reached out to those families and let them know that, hey, these objects are coming on loan from the Smithsonian for an extended period of time. And so we began to reunite the families with these objects, and some incredible stories came out of this. And Erin, who's here, she was working at NMAI at the time. She's here at the Autry. She was part of that process and got to see some of these amazing experiences with these families being reunited. And so most museums will have a catalog card, and the object will say, this example is, it's an Osage coat. It's made out of broadcloth. It has some beadwork on it, and it was collected in 1910. That's about all you're going to get in a museum on a catalog card. But we tracked down, we saw that in the purchase receipt, this was sold by a man and probably belonged to a man named Henry Red Eagle from the Osage Nation. So we went to the Osage Nation and we tracked down his descendants, and this is Ed Red Eagle Jr., the great-grandson of the man who wore this jacket. And so by reuniting real people with these objects, we've exponentially expanded our knowledge of that object and of that community. He said, I know what ceremony this was worn in. I know who made this jacket. I can tell you what the design patterns mean. In fact, I'm now inspired our family is now inspired to make another jacket like this for our grandson, who's going to be one of our ceremonial drum keepers. Another example, this is the Big Soldier family from the Iowa tribe. We tracked them down. Their great-grandfather, Ben Holloway, wore this beautiful breechcloth, and we didn't know much about it. Again, the information on the catalog card was very scant, but we brought the family in, and there they have pictures of their great-grandfather and great-grandmother, and were able to tell us stories about their great-grandfather and what ceremony this breechcloth was used in. And the family got to touch this. They had no idea this existed, and were able to touch it for the first time in 100 years. And it brought tears to their eyes when they saw this for the first time. And I have a personal story here too. This is a delegation of Kaw Indians, and I'm vice chairman of the Kaw tribe and enrolled member of the Kaw tribe. And this was a delegation of Kaw Indians that went to Washington, D.C. in 1909 to negotiate a treaty. And in Bethesda, Maryland, just outside of Washington, there was a photo studio, and a lot of the tribal delegations would be sent out to Bethesda to get a portrait made. And I don't know how the laser thing works on here, but the gentleman in the first row, second from the left, is my great-grandfather, James Pepper. And the gentleman sitting next to him is a man named Muscogee. And if you're a Kaw tribal member, this is a very famous portrait, and we have this in our living rooms. Most of us have this hanging on the wall somewhere. And so when I was an intern at NMAI, I was looking at these Harrington records and the purchase receipts, and I saw the name Muscogee, and I went over to the storage cabinet, opened the drawer, and I saw this item. And I recognized it right away because you can see that's an otter collar that he's wearing in this historic photograph. And so I got very, very excited about it, and I contacted the descendants of Muscogee, who are friends of the family, and asked Bill Muscogee, who's the grandson of Muscogee in that picture. He came to the museum as these objects arrived from the Smithsonian Institution, and we had our own reunion. It reunited us as tribal citizens. You know, my great-grandfather and his grandfather in that historic picture with this otter collar. And so that was originally kind of the inspiration of thinking about, well, these objects do have a life. They do have a life force power. They're not just dead objects in a museum, and they were made with care and love for somebody special within that community, and seeing these objects really come to life again by being reunited with real people. And we have many more stories like that, but we're going to continue to tell those stories and reunite families with these objects. And you can see these are items that are at least 100 years old or older, but we're still using these kinds of objects today. And Heather helped with the design of this exhibition. And if you looked down at the top of the exhibit, the design of the exhibit forms an infinity symbol, which represents the continuum of our cultural lifeways within our communities. So I encourage everybody to come to First Americans Museum. We've made some short videos of these family reunions, and they're very, very moving. I was, as Joe mentioned, I was former director of the Heard Museum, and one of the most successful aspects of the Heard Museum is that they have this incredible museum store. If you've ever been to the Heard Museum, you probably dropped a few bucks in their museum store, but their methodology is that they sell one-of-a-kind handmade native items in their store, and they sell close to $5 million a year in that store, supporting over 40 native families full-time, just making jewelry and other items. And we have incredible artists in Oklahoma, but there isn't really a market for them in Oklahoma. They go to places like Scottsdale, or they go to places like Santa Fe. And we said, we want to support our artists here at home. And so we developed this incredible museum store. It's much bigger than this picture. And just to give you an idea of where the store is going now, and we carry those one-of-a-kind handmade items or products that are made by native-owned companies. And I was director of Gilchrist Museum for a time in Tulsa. We did close to $300,000 a year in sales in a good year. We've been open for a little over 6 months. We've sold over $700,000 worth of items made by native peoples, and we're continuing to buy and replenish from those native artists. So we're helping to support our native art economy in Oklahoma. I pulled a rib from the National Museum of the American Indian in terms of our food. If you've traveled anywhere in the world, one of your experiences is going to be the cuisine from that particular area. And one thing that National Museum of the American Indian has done very well is to showcase indigenous foods from around the hemisphere. And so we took that methodology and we have this incredible menu. In fact, we had a great review the other day by a local or regional food magazine. But all of the ingredients that we have in our restaurant are ingredients that are indigenous to the contiguous United States. There's no pork, there's no beef on the menu. It's bison, it's turkey. We did cheat a little bit. You can't have pozole without a little bit of pork in there, so we threw a little bit of pork in there. But one of the most unique menus in Oklahoma, because food is part of the experience of experiencing our cultures in Oklahoma. And we have some modern twists on things. That's our bison burger. In fact, we source many of our foods from the tribes themselves. Cheyenne and Arapaho has their own commercial bison herd. We source our bison from the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe. We have an incredible theater where we have conversation series like we're having today, small symposia. And our seats retract into the wall so we can open up that space if we want to. And of course, we can have receptions and banquets and other things within the theater if we want. And I think my deputy threw this and wanted me to plug that, yes, we do rent our facility out for weddings. They asked me to be a model in that. I said, no. This is the Hall of the People that's part of our earned income strategy, is to rent the facility out. We have to think about those things, how we can generate earned income. But in the end, even though we have great amenities and great exhibits, we're about living culture, and we have great programming throughout the year that showcases the diversity of our native tribes in Oklahoma. And here, this is a group of native kids that came in for storytelling time and help tell stories for other kids, non-native kids that came to the museum. But that's really the heart and soul of our museum, is our living cultures. And if people walk away, as Stephen said, if people walk away and say, well, I didn't know that. Well, if people can walk away from our museum and realize we're not all the same, we're very different from each other. We're still here. We still exist. We're not gone. And the fact that we're doing our best to. Some people think we're invisible, and we're trying to increase our profile within our community and to let people know that we're still here. So I tried to make that a little bit shorter so we'd have a little time for Q&A. Is there time for Q&A on this? A couple questions. So thank you very much. We belong. That's our story at First Americans Museum.
In your career, what is your favorite experience, like your favorite museum experience throughout your career? I know you've been a lot of different institutions, and maybe what is your favorite maybe moment or time frame in which facility you're working for?
Well, I've had a lot of incredible moments in my career, and I've been in the museum field for 38 years. I was 3 years old when I started. Actually, I said I was 5 years old earlier, but I've been in the museum field for a long time. There's a few moments in my career that would be amazing for anybody, but very special for me. One of them was opening day of the National Museum of the American Indian. That was an incredible day. Rick entrusted me to help organize the Native Nations procession, over 700 tribal nations on the mall. And see, if I start crying, then it's a really great symposium, right, with Heather. But Rick gave me the honor of leading that procession on opening day. So, thank you. And the second is this museum, First Americans Museum. Opening this museum is one of the most important things I'll ever do, and probably in my life, was to get, because this is our story. Heather and I, very emotional for us, all of us working at the museum, because we are telling our stories in our voices, from our perspective. They're not telling these stories in history books, and people need to hear these stories. The stories of our survival, the stories of our perseverance, and who we are today, and that we're still here. So, but I've had many great experiences over the years, the different places I've been, but those two are standouts. And again, two people very important in my life, Rick West and then and George, Joe's dad. I worked with George for many years, and a lot of things that, one thing I remember George telling me is that, you know, he would complain a little bit about anthropologists and how much they think they know about Native culture, and people who would call themselves an expert in a particular tribe without even stepping foot into that community. And he says, Jim, you know, we only told those people what we wanted them to know. We didn't tell them everything. And that's true. And that is very true. And that's one thing that stuck with me. But, and I've met, you know, Suzanne Harjo is a big influence in my life. Incredible woman, helped get the NAGPRA legislation passed. I remember Vine Deloria walking into my office one time and talking about decolonization. He said, if you're going to decolonize the museum, you give it all back. You can't have decolonization if you still have the museum. So he, you know, you know, a lot of great people that I learned from over the years. So I appreciate that. Anyway.
Yes, I just want to share one quick reflection. There's one person not with us today who would have absolutely fit in with today's program and appreciated it from every perspective, and that's Marshall McKay.
Yes, and thank you to Marshall McKay, giving us an opportunity to tell our stories. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have so many questions, but I'll limit it to one. Funding. You are funded a different way, I think, than some of our other speakers today. And I don't mean your construction funding. I mean long-term operations. How do you fund the magnificence and keep it going?
Yes, and you know, we don't have unlimited resources, obviously, and we have three legs to our stool for funding that holds us up, and eventually we'll have a fourth leg. But the first is, we made sure when we had the opportunity to kind of redesign the museum in the interior, when we got jump started again. I have to tell you a story. When I got there in 2017, I looked at the plans of the museum, which were designed in the year 2000, and over in our lobby, there in the design were a bank of payphones. I thought, oh boy, we've got to, you know, we got to make some changes in here, and so. So we put in a bank of water bottle filling stations. All of the lighting we converted to LED lighting for energy savings. But we also kind of re-envisioned the space to modern standards to think about how we can maximize earned income. And that's why we added a full-service kitchen. Kitchens are always an afterthought in a museum. It's always kind of tucked away in the corner somewhere. And we put in a 3,500 square foot kitchen so that we could cater up to 1,000 people for an event at our facility. We reoriented the entrance to make it more accommodating for events in the evening time to rent the facility out. You saw that we're pushing weddings. It's a great wedding venue. You can walk to the top of that mound, as I mentioned. It's about 2/3 of a mile round trip, but you have this incredible backdrop of Oklahoma City up there. Adding the museum store, you know, our goal was very ambitious to try to hit $700,000 in sales our first year. We're going to be over $1 million in sales, which helps our operations. The Heard Museum, 2/3 of their revenue comes from their museum store, which is incredible. So, and then of course ticket sales as well. So that's the earned income part of that, and then contributed income. That's the fundraising. Those are the grants that we write, the memberships that we sell, and so I do have a development staff dedicated to raising funds for the museum, because we are not we're owned by the city in terms of the facility, but we are a private nonprofit organization that manages the museum. And the third leg of that stool is we do receive a little bit of an appropriation from the city of Oklahoma City, but that probably won't last forever. So the fourth leg is to build that endowment and to work on a planned giving strategy so that we have an endowment that'll help fund our operations. So, I equate this of, a baby elephant has just been born, and now you have to feed it and take care of it and clean up after it. And it's going to take a while for us to find our groove. And we don't know what normal is because we opened in the middle of COVID. And so we don't know what a normal year is yet. But so far, our numbers are great. And for considering the times we're in, and we only see our numbers growing. There's going to be a development that happens around our facility. A conference hotel and an indoor-outdoor water park are being built next to our facility that'll bring in a lot more visitors. Again, those 120,000 people that drive by every day on the highway, to get more of them to come off the highway and spend time with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I know we're running to overtime. I'm just going to add a few closing comments. Thank you for your thoughtful words. And thank you for everyone who attended today. So putting something like this together, particularly it's our first seminar here, and our new facility is not open yet. In a space we never had anything like this, one always has a bit of nerves. So I'm just going to double back just a little bit, if you don't mind. So within my tribe, the name we call ourselves is A'anine. The name we're commonly known by is Grovan. There was a man back in the 19th century whose name was Bulaj. My father wrote a book about him in the 80s. The book is called 7 Visions of Bulaj. And Bulaj, who is a really well-known warrior, he wanted to be a keeper of one of our sacred objects. In my tribe, we have 2. And the way that he did that is he would fast. So the first day he would fast for 7 days, 7 nights, no food or water. Then the second day, I have to do my math backwards. Second day would be 6, second time it would be 6, and then 5, 4, et cetera, et cetera. And right the day before he fasted, and he didn't know he was going to fast, it would rain. And that rain was a signal to him that something good was going to happen. And then that evening, he would have a dream, and in that dream, it would tell him what to do. So oftentimes through that story, when I think about rain, I think about something good's going to happen. This morning I woke up and I noticed there was rain on the ground. So something good happened today. We all came together. We shared our knowledge. I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate everyone who took the time to be with us today. I appreciate all the special guests that came in from out of town and made time for us to share their knowledge with us. Thanks to the San Manuel community, we have received funding for this seminar. We will be producing a journal before the end of the year of this proceedings that we will distribute for free to tribal colleges as well as tribal museums. Also, if I can, just acknowledge some of our staff who put this together. Ben, who is the master of logistics and organization. Rob and Brittany, please stand up. Who did all the technical aspects to this. Keep in mind, 2 cameras, a guy in New York, we got the Zoom, we got everything. I think they talked to Elon Musk to ensure one of his communication satellites went over our head to make sure that we got that all organized. Of course, to Wendy for organizing the food, Laura for assisting with fundraising, and of course, Amanda and Karima in my department for their support. The fun continues tomorrow at the Autry Museum. where the second day of the McKay Seminar will take place. Doors open at 9:30 with opening remarks at 10. I guarantee you it will be warmer there than it is here. Tomorrow's topic will be Native American art. We have a great lineup of speakers, so please make sure to attend. Best to everyone, and please travel safely. Thank you.